Hi, everybody, and welcome to HR Exchange Network. I am Francesca DeMeglio, the host of today's interview and also the editor of HR Exchange Network. I am delighted to be joined today by Cherise Bernard. She is the head of DEI at Invite, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Francesca, for having me.
I so appreciate your time and all the work you've been doing at Invite. How about we talk a little bit about the fact that diversity, equity, and inclusion was a big, huge priority for people a year ago in the wake of George Floyd's murder. And we saw a lot of people really stepping up and doing what they had to do. And now, with the economic downturn, we've seen a little bit of backlash, a little bit of going backwards some. What are some ways HR professionals who really want to make sure this stays on the front burner, that this is a priority, can do? What can they do to make sure that this remains top of mind?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Francesca. That's such an important question because you're right. We are seeing some companies and some organizations really step back and take a step back from all of their commitments. And, as unfortunate as this is, I think what HR professionals can do is to make sure that DE&I is not an add-on to their efforts, right? We want to make sure that diversity, equity, and inclusion is embedded into the DNA of your everyday work. It's not a nice to have, it is a must have. It is a business imperative. And so my perspective is treating DE&I as we treat any other business imperative within the organization. Sales, product development, all of those things are embedded into the consciousness and into the goals and efforts of the organization. DE&I must do the same, not only internally, but making sure that whatever your product is, whatever your focus is of your organization, is focused on your consumers who may show up to the table differently. And that's why inclusion and equity have to be a part of the DNA and not just a nice to have or an add-on.
So agree with you. I think there are a lot of challenges when it comes to integrating. I feel like it might be the case that a lot of people have the ability to see the numbers and see, oh, I need to do diversity hiring, but they kind of fall short when it gets to the inclusion part. Do you have
Yeah.
any advice for them about what to do in that most vital step that might actually be the most important part of DEI?
Absolutely. It's actually my opinion that until organizations get their inclusion and equity policies and environment and ethos right, the goal in diversity numbers kind of fall short, right? You don't want to bring in all of this diversity, but when they get to the organization, they feel unwelcomed or those folks feel like they don't belong. And so how we have to look at this is really, you can start with looking at your policies. Are your policies making it easy and making it streamlined for anyone to have great access, great opportunities to advance? What is the culture of the organization with regards to having conversations about development? What are your benefits? What's your compensation like? Are you doing pay equity analyses? And so all of these things contributes to the ethos of inclusion. And simultaneously with making sure that your hiring goals are diverse and your hiring process is inclusive, the organization, the culture of the organization itself has to be welcoming with regards to benefits, with regards to how we talk to each other, even with regards to how we're educating each other around identity and around how we're showing up authentically in the workplace. And so all of those things have to happen.
I love how you brought up education. Cherise is going to be joining us as part of a panel discussion that will reference this particular point during our Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging event, July 11th and 12th. Tell me a little bit about what you mean when you talk about education. What are some of the things we can expect to hear about during that panel discussion, which you will be joined by T. Tara Turkanes, who is the head of DEI at Leaf Group. Go ahead.
Absolutely. So, I think our L&D teams, our learning and development teams at all of our organizations need to also embed learning and development around equity and inclusion topics. And those topics could talk about what's the difference between equity and equality, right? Some folks use those terms interchangeably, not realizing that there's a very different meaning to equity and equality. How do we teach people about identity? Showing up in the workplace authentically means understanding identity. One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is ability, right? How do we talk about invisible disabilities as well as visible disabilities, how those are showing up in the workplace, and how folks with disability interact and engage with people on their teams, making sure that there's an equitable process for their advancement as well. And so all of these things require learning, right? I think we're all on this equity journey. And so there are going to be things that we don't know. There are going to be things that we need to learn more about. And when you make a misstep, even educating our people about how to apologize. We think
Yeah.
apologizing is, oh, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. There's no preposition in a real apology. A real apology is two parts. I'm sorry that what I did, and moving forward, I will. This is how I'm going to change it. And so even educating people on, if you do make a misstep, which we all will, because no one knows it all. If you do make a misstep, how do you come back from that? How do you show resilience? How do you make sure that you're maintaining the connection with your team and maintaining that engagement? How do you apologize? Even that's a part of inclusion. So I think education, learning, and development is such a huge part of this work. And we are really embarking on it. We're making sure to take the time out to develop curriculums. And that's one of the parts of this work that I'm really excited about.
I love that you said that. I actually, once upon a time, wrote about marriages and relationships for a website that no longer exists, of course. And at the time, I spoke to a communications expert who said, when you apologize in your personal relationships, and this extends to professional ones, Cherise just told you, you say, I am sorry that, and add whatever you did, and then say, I will try not to do that again. And this is how I'm going to try not to do it again. You have to give the plan in place to avoid making that blunder more than once. And I think those are really important points to make. I think a lot of this comes down to us learning about relationships and building better ones. And that's, in my opinion, the beauty of DEI. It's really making your life richer with better relationships. That's what it's about. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's about showing curiosity, right?
Yes.
And by the way, there's a really fine line between curiosity and then also microaggressive behavior. So we want to really be aware of that and be very careful. But curiosity is the vehicle and is the avenue by which we really do this work, right? We have to be able to learn about each other, develop those relationships, and that is the way we become allies. I can't be an ally for you, Francesca, if I don't know what your roadblocks are. You can't
Mhm.
be an ally for me if you don't know where I'm struggling or what I need help with. And so building those better relationships, learning how to communicate with each other in respectful ways, and learning the fine line between curiosity and really getting interested in how your team works, learning about your team, actually caring about your team is
Mhm.
really the secret sauce of all of this.
It makes magic. It really does. If you have a team that is cohesive and feels comfortable with one another and cares about each other, as you said, there is that big element. People don't want to talk about work as family, and you shouldn't, but you have to have some kind of collegiality, some kind of bond that brings you together. So really appreciate that. First of all, do you have any final thoughts on what we just talked about, making DEI a priority, how to get inclusion at the forefront of your DNA? What would you like people to take away from this?
I think my final thought here is we don't have to be intimidated by this work. I think when we think about DE&I, our first thought is to say, well, we'll never be done with this. There's really no end point in this work. And I think the way that we, lessen the intimidation is just by understanding that it's in small doses. There are things that you can do every single day to advance this work, things that don't necessarily have to have an audience, right? Making sure that you're pronouncing someone's name correctly is creating an inclusive culture for that person. making sure that you are creating equitable practices in your team and making sure that you're advancing people in the way that they need to be advanced and not really doing a one size fits all kind of approach, that's creating inclusivity and equity in your organization. And so I think that people hear this and they're scaling back and they're pulling back because it's intimidating. It's like, how do we measure this? What's the impact? And I get it, but it's the everyday actions that if everyone does it, we can create inclusive cultures by everyone doing their part every day. You don't have to be perfect with everything every day, but if you commit to something, if you commit to using better language, if you commit to making sure that you're pronouncing people's names correctly, if you commit to even using gender pronouns, you're doing your part. And as the days go on, commit to even more. And so that's my final thought about this, is that let's not make this bigger than what it really is, to make it intimidating for us. Let's break it down into bite-sized pieces so that we can do the work. And that's all I want people to do, is just do the work, do your work every day. Everyone owns inclusion. It's not just the job of your HR team or your DE&I leader. It's the job of everyone. Everyone owns it.
It's true. It's about building those relationships, like I said, and showing respect, as you mentioned about, using the pronouns, using the correct pronunciation of names. These are things that are just about respect. It's not an offense to anyone. It's
Right.
not going to hinder your life. It's going to show respect for your neighbor, your coworker, your partner, whoever we're talking about.
That's
And on that note, I did want to ask you one more thing before we bid adieu, but what do you think will be the highlight of our panel discussion? Why should people tune in to see us talk further about this topic?
I think people should tune in because we're going to have a great story. I am planning to use some storytelling and use some real life examples around this work. I think that we often separate this work and we make it very theoretical, but I want to talk about how it shows up for real in daily life. And I think we're going to have some great banter. And if you're coming to just hear practical, tactical strategies, you definitely should tune in. So I think that's what everyone has to look forward to for this session.
Oh, and I'm looking forward to it. You've got me pumped. I can't wait. I hope all of you will join us also. We'll be going live on July 11th, and we will be with Cherise to close out the event on July 12th. We'll see you there. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.